Have you ever frustratingly stopped playing a game you really thought would be good simply because you just weren't having fun with it? Maybe you found yourself going back to it time and time again because you keep hearing how great it is. It has a 90 on Metacritic. It's the latest entry in a series that has a track record of incredible games. It's supposed to be good, but no matter how hard you try, you just can't get into it. Maybe you wanted to like it so bad that you even forced yourself to finish it in an effort to find that one plot twist, that aha moment, that thing that would finally make everything click. And after you fought that final boss, watched that last cutscene, you processed what you just played as the credits rolled, and suddenly you realized that moment never came. And it's because of experiences like this, or because of the fact that you just don't like playing games you aren't having fun with, that you find yourself unwilling to put up with the grind of a particular game you aren't enjoying. Maybe that game asks you to backtrack too much. Maybe things start off too slow. Maybe you can't quite get past a certain level. Come on. Yes! And this makes sense, right? Why should we waste time on a game we aren't having fun with when we could be spending that time on another game that's more deserving of it? Here's the problem. In allowing these moments of displeasure to affect our progress in a game, we may unintentionally be robbing ourselves of an otherwise incredible experience that we didn't even know we wanted. Like the fact that Okami drags in the beginning, but eventually blossoms into a game worth trudging through. Or how grinding through the mission Cortana in Halo 3 is an absolute slog, but the result of getting through that mission is eventually rewarding. Would you believe me if I told you that relying too much on whether or not we are having fun with the game to know when to stop playing it is intrinsically flawed? Because there's more to playing a game than just having fun. I know this because despite it now being my favorite entry in one of my favorite series of all time, I was not having fun when I first played through Xenoblade Chronicles 2. You see, I bought this game on a whim with no prior knowledge of the series, and despite the fact that I knew I probably wouldn't like it since I wasn't into RPGs at the time. Like, at all. The main culprit, as many of you probably guessed, was the combat, which is a problem considering that's what the game basically is. Like many others, I found it difficult to grasp when I first played the game, which was made worse by the fact that you can't review the tutorials for some stupid reason, and I also thought it was a good idea to do this half the time. Nevertheless, I stumbled my way forward despite giving up on it multiple times. And look, I'm not saying we should play through a game we hate absolutely every second of. There was a silver lining to my experience with Xenoblade 2, which I'll get to in a bit, but I think this quote from Maxwell Lee best sums up what I'm trying to say. Games do not have to just be fun and enjoyable anymore. The best games have a mix of enjoyable gameplay and story beats that challenge you to grow as a person. In the final moments of the pre-prologue of Bayonetta 3, Bayonetta gets beat down pretty bad. What follows is a small interactive section where you, the player, are controlling Bayonetta, who has mustered what strength she has left to get up and start swinging sluggishly at the antagonist. Now, this would have worked just fine as a cutscene, not only because it would have gotten the idea of Bayonetta's unyielding resolve across very well, but also because you aren't even able to really do anything as the player in this moment. Yet the developers chose to let you play through it not so that you could have fun, but so that you could get the same sense of helplessness that Bayonetta was probably experiencing herself. And most of us love this stuff. Being immersed in gameplay or engrossed in these stories is what we're here for. Part of what makes The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker one of, if not my favorite games of all time, is the fact that levels such as your first visit to the Forsaken Fortress are so immersive, thanks to not only the dreary atmosphere, but also to the fact that I had to make do without my sword that I had become accustomed to at this point. And as a result of having my sword taken away, that level wasn't what I would consider fun when I first played it back in elementary school, but it really made me appreciate having my sword that much more when I eventually got it back. And this literally did help me to grow as a person. It taught me not to take things for granted just because I have them. Maybe there's a lesson in perseverance for those games with a slow start, or with annoying levels, or even for games that you hate almost everything about. Everything except one element. You see, while my inability to make a connection with the combat in Xenoblade 2 initially made me think the game wasn't for me, the reason I kept coming back to it was because of the story. There was just something about it that kept pulling me back in, so I decided to focus on it during my playthrough rather than the combat. As I did, I remember becoming invested in the characters. Rex and his journey of self-discovery, compassion, and sacrifice were inspiring. Pyra and Mithra dealing with feelings of regret, and Nia learning not to be ashamed of who she was were both so relatable to me. I remember the feeling of becoming engrossed in the world where I could explore these massive, beautiful titans. I remember getting lost in the soundtrack, which continually captivated me and remains as some of my favorite music of all time to this day. As a result, I constantly felt this push, this drive to finish the game for some reason. And as I neared that final boss, I remember the combat finally clicking, which actually made it fun. Only took me basically the whole game for it to happen, but man, was the payoff from the story worth it to push through. This is one of the very few games that makes me feel a certain way that I can't quite put into words, and I am forever grateful I got to experience it and that I didn't give up on it too soon. And while you could argue that Xenoblade 2 shouldn't have taken that long for me to get into, there will always be games that don't connect with you immediately, just like Starfield didn't for my friend Dan, who shared his experience with me.
In Starfield, I feel like the beginning is kind of lackluster. All it is you touch a space rock and you don't know why and you don't know the implications of it. Later on, of course, the story picks up and it gets interesting.
I mean, even the head of Xbox himself, Phil Spencer, admits that for the first 3 to 4 hours of the game, you're trying to figure out, what am I actually doing? We could go down the rabbit hole of why that is or isn't a bad choice for a game developer to make, but the point is, just because a game isn't enticing in the beginning, doesn't mean it will disappoint you in the end. But what if it does disappoint you in the end? What if, despite the generally positive buzz around Starfield, things never clicked for Dan specifically? What if there was no point in which he felt the game lived up to his expectations for it? Because one thing I didn't mention is that Dan was having fun with Starfield in the beginning for the most part. As a result, there wasn't much pushing him in the direction to put the game down. Just like there was nothing to stop me from putting down The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, despite it not living up to my expectations. This troubling revelation was just about as much of a shock to me as the Pokemon Company's decision to slow down their game output for 2024, because to be clear, I was very much aboard that insane hype train for this game like everyone else. And aside from some of the frustrating sections or dealing with some of the finicky new abilities, there wasn't anything that I really disliked about the game at all. In fact, this was the first Zelda game I had ever played that left me feeling so unfulfilled when I finished it. Everyone was singing this game's praises. It was the game I had been waiting for. Critics loved it. Dan, who is also a longtime Zelda fan, was engrossed in this game. What was I doing wrong? What was I missing? I can't tell you how many times I thought to myself, maybe if I just explore a little bit more in this area, or mess around with Ultra Hand and fusing a little more, or find that secret hidden ability, then I'll get it. It wasn't until a little later after the game launched that I saw some people starting to make videos about their overall dissatisfaction with Tears of the Kingdom, which meant I wasn't alone. And it was at that point that I realized I was looking at this whole thing all wrong. Because for me, there wasn't anything to get with Tears of the Kingdom. There was no aha moment. I wasn't missing anything. I was doing what I do best, overthinking things. You see, I was expecting this game to be something it was never meant to be, and this is normal, especially for a game that is a sequel to one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time. Not to mention, I had just finished the conclusion to one of the best narratives I've ever experienced in a game with the expansion to Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed. As a result, I was expecting the story of Tears of the Kingdom to absolutely blow my mind like all the Xenoblade stories have done for me in the past. I wanted the gameplay to make me feel the same, if not better than it did when I played Breath of the Wild for the first time. That magical feeling of seeing a vast open world, running on a giant Pop-Tart for the first time. A game where I could escape into a virtual world to do anything I wanted in a time when I needed it most. However, it wasn't fair of me to compare the story of a single game to the culmination of 13 years worth of storytelling, and that feeling I got when I first played Breath of the Wild can never be replicated. The issue wasn't that Tears of the Kingdom wasn't a good game. In fact, I think it's a masterpiece like so many others do. And the story was good. There were even a couple plot twists. They just didn't hit me like I wanted them to. I was so focused on worrying about whether or not I would ultimately be disappointed by the game that I wasn't able to focus on just enjoying it. I mean, I only recently realized that I never even took the time to fight a Lionel in Tears of the Kingdom, which isn't bad on its own considering I fought a few in Breath of the Wild, but I also realized that I never fought a Gleeok or even a Frox. You see, in my obsession to find that aha moment, I inadvertently robbed myself of possibly some of the more exciting moments in the game. And it's because of that same obsession that I failed to realize that things had already clicked. So if you're having fun with a game, don't think twice about it. Just play that game and enjoy the time you're having with it in the moment. Maybe it won't be the most fulfilling game and it might not even meet your expectations, but not every game needs to. In the words of a famous scholar, we would have no knowledge of what makes a fantastic video game if we didn't also play a plethora of mediocre ones. Okay, it wasn't a famous scholar, it was me, but I think it still rings true. And if you aren't having fun with a game you really want to enjoy, ask yourself, what can this game offer me? For some, the answer may indeed be nothing at all. You may be halfway through a game and there might not be a single appealing thing about it to you, and hear me when I say this, that's fine. I think it's important to enjoy at least some aspect of a game, because if you don't, you should probably stop playing it. And look, I get these things might be obvious, but even if we know them subconsciously, we're not always fully aware of how we're letting both our expectations for a game and even our first impressions of it affect our experience with it in the moment. Maybe there's a game you need to give a second, third, or even fourth chance because it has something about it that's interesting to you or has you curious, and the things that you don't like about it are at least tolerable. And hey, you never know if by finishing it, you end up having an incredible experience, or you might even find your next favorite game. Thanks for watching.